Hello, good evening, and welcome to Prog Chattery 777. Talking about Genesis. We've made it 2, and then there were 3. This is the first album by the most commercially successful lineup of Genesis, the 3-man lineup. It's got Phil Collins on lead vocals and drums, Mike Rutherford on guitar and bass, including a bit of lead guitar, and Tony Banks on keyboards. First album after Steve Hackett left. Very clever title, and then there were 3. Like that's brilliant. Just a little too obvious. It's a bit of an awkward album. I think the album cover is kind of, it's got an atmosphere to it, but I don't really like the album cover. It's not the best. And yeah, like I said, the album itself is almost as awkward as the album cover. It did have their first major hit on it, which kind of saved the band. Yeah, it's a weird album. It doesn't really, I guess it fits in the story, and it's a necessary part of the story, but I don't think as an album they really pulled it together, although there's some really good material on it. Yeah, it's weird. So, yeah, anyway, so Steve Hackett ends up leaving the band. He left in the middle of mixing the live album Seconds Out, and he had already done a solo album, and I think he just felt restricted within the confines of the Genesis democracy. And so, yeah, he just kind of didn't show up to the studio one day, and you kind of feel bad for Hackett because the other departures in Genesis, first Anthony Phillips and then Peter Gabriel, were kind of traumatic experiences for the band. It was like, will we be able to carry on? And when Hackett left, they just kind of, all right, I guess there's 3 of us now. And it's kind of funny how Genesis, and Hackett was then, for live shows, replaced by Daryl Stuermer, fantastic guitar player. And so it was Daryl Stuermer and Chester Thompson, which were the live players. But other than that, it's kind of funny that they never fully replaced anyone that left. They just kept getting smaller and going, okay, this is Genesis now. Which I guess you kind of got to admire that. I mean, it keeps a direct lineage with where the albums were going. But I think the reason that this album is awkward is that the prog thing that they were doing, I think, was starting to get stale. And there's moments on this where you can kind of tell they'd gone as far as they could go with that. I mean, they did The Lamb and they did Selling England and Trick of the Tail. Those are 3 kind of seminal albums, and you can't just keep doing that, right? And like I said, some of the songs on here kind of show that style was getting tired. They also have shortened the songs down quite a bit as well. Like, there's no big intros. For the first time, I guess, kind of since The Lamb, there's no really, big, long instrumental sections on here, which is kind of a bummer. But the playing is still good, and it's still, like I said, it's still in that proggy style, but it's starting to get boring now. I think the second side is much better than the first side. That's a thing. And yeah, I'm going to stop yammering and just go straight into talking about the songs. Then get some lineage going on here. So the album opens up, first side starts out with Down and Out. And it actually might be one of the best openers Genesis ever had. It's a brilliant introduction to the album, I think. Kind of starts out with mysterious synthy lines and some percussive sounds. And you get this really bright, optimistic guitar line. And then finally the drums and the bass come in, and it just turns into this crazy, menacing, hyper-syncopated, like, rocker. This is one of the heaviest songs Genesis ever did. I mean, it might be their heaviest song. And I mean, once the drums kick in, it's and it's got that really weird syncopated drum part. Really hard to play. I mean, it shows that, musically, they're all still firing at all cylinders. I mean, Collins, he'd been playing with Brand X as well because he wanted to have a band where he was, the full-time drummer. And his playing is fantastic. It's a stellar opener. And the lyrics kind of talk about commercial pressure and whatnot, and It's kind of a telltale sign. You look at the album, you see all the songs are shorter and blah 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 blah. So yeah, great heavy opener, and then we get to track 2, Undertow, a Banks song, and it's all right. It's typical Genesis sound, but it just sounds stale at times. It's still a good song. I like the little synth line after the big chorus, and it doesn't have an intro. It's just kind of, here's a Genesis song. I used to like it a lot more, but it gets a bit tiring. I'm not as big a fan of it these days. Then song 3, Ballad of Big. This is a you listen to it, all the parts of it are really, really good. It's just, I don't really like the structure. It's got the fast time change and whatnot. It goes from a kind of a shuffly, high-paced kind of a rhythm to the dun, 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 dun. And that's a proggy thing, and it's got that shock value to it. It's got a fanciful lyric, whimsical lyric about kind of like, it's almost like a Western thing. Big Jim Cooley. But the structure, it's kind of boring, because it does the crazy time change, and then it goes back, and then the time change again, and then it just kind of ends. It doesn't seem to go anywhere. I don't know. It's disappointing, because it starts out sounding so good, and then it's like, I don't know. Not a big fan. Then we get Snowbound, which again it sounds so critical about this album, but like I said, the second side I think is a lot better. I'm not a huge fan of Snowbound either, because it's repetitive and a bit dreary, and I get it. There's a feeling of staleness, I guess. The lyrics are quite interesting, and kind of creepy. It's about being buried alive in the snow, I think, which is freaky. But again, the song, they throw the album on, and it's like, okay, come on. There goes the snowman. But then we get to track 5, we get to Burning Rope, and this is kind of the opening song for side 1 and the closing song for side 1 are kind of the saving graces. Down and Out is a classic, and Burning Rope is pretty good. This is the only kind of extended song on the album. It's not one that goes over 7 minutes. It does have the instrumental section. It's not quite the same level as what they'd done before, but it's good. It's got Rutherford guitar solo on it. It was written by Banks, but give Rutherford a chance to establish himself as a guitar player, and not just a bass player and rhythm guitar player. And the song is really good. Colin's voice on this album is still kind of just hitting the notes, but his drumming, like I said, is fantastic, and yeah, it's good. Burning Rope is good. We flipped the album over. Side 2, this is where I think the album picks up and it becomes something of good value. We get Deep in the Motherlode, which is it's kind of an epic, but again, it's only about 5 minutes. It doesn't really feel like it overstays its welcome either. And it's got this neat. It's got the kind of shuffly rhythm with the heavy synthesizers. Ding 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 ding. And I think it's really good, and it's got this kind of dynamic middle section. And I think it doesn't seem quite as stale as some of the other songs on the album, because there is a freshness to how it's condensed into just 5 minutes, and it's got an engaging structure. I really like when it comes out of the middle section back into the verse, where you get that really cool. I am a fan of that song. I think they opened the concerts with that song as well, Deep in the Motherlode, which is great opener, fantastic opener. Then we get Many Too Many, another Banks song. I think this is way better than Undertow. This is, it's a short piano ballad. It's got a strong chorus and a strong hook, but it's not over repetitive. It's very light. I mean, it's a light song. It's a shame they never played it live, because it's a contender for the best song on the album, I think. I think it's classic. Not a classic Genesis track, but it's a good Genesis track. Then we get Scenes from a Night's Dream. I think Collins did the lyrics on this, and this is kind of what Ballad of Big could have been. It's a short, condensed kind of story song about Little Nemo. It's about a comic book, I think. Something or another. But it's got just enough changes and twists and turns, and it's unpredictable enough to keep it engaging. So Scenes from a Night's Dream, I think is again really good song. So far all the first 3 songs on side 2 have been better than any of the songs on side 1, except for Down and Out. Maybe that's a contender for one of the best on the album, I should say. Yeah, Scenes from a Night's Dream, excellent. Then we get Say It's Alright, Joe. This is a song the Rutherford song. It doesn't get talked about that much, but I think it's pretty close to being a classic slice of Genesis. It's got really slow, moody verses. I think it's about an alcoholic. And the chorus that comes out, it just explodes, and it's very dynamic. It's kind of got I guess there's kind of a classical type influence in there. I love how dramatic the chorus is. It just explodes, and then it winds its way back down to the moody verse. And after the second chorus, when the song ends, it goes into one of those little arpeggiated things, kind of reminiscent to the really early stuff. And I think that's a highlight moment of the album. Really cool. And the big shine on. Great song. Lady Lies, The Lady Lies. This is probably the best on the album. It gets an edge over everything else. It's the one really classic Genesis song on the album, I think. Got a really dramatic, shuffly, fusiony kind of rhythm to it. There's a few unpredictable changes. Whimsical lyrics about, lady that lives in a tumble-down cottage and seduces men. It's fantastic, and then the end has got it's the closest the album comes to having that instrumental thing at the end. It's just he doesn't really solo, but Banks is just kind of hitting these chords, dun 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 dun, and it's just fantastic. And then the keyboard solo in the song, of course, he's just kind of he's playing along with the vocal melody. So good. Classic Genesis. Lady Lies. I'm definitively saying right now that's the best song on the album. I'm sure there's people that would agree with me. Burning Rope's probably contender, Down and Out's a contender. But yeah, great stuff. Then the album finishes, the end of side 2. Finishes with the big hit, Follow You, Follow Me. It's actually a pretty good song. The thing that annoys me on the album is that because they knew it was going to be the hit single, I think they had a good idea that they had a hit on their hands. The production values are so much better on the very last song than they are on the rest of the album. So you kind of get used to this kind of a muddy mix, and then all of a sudden that guitar line comes in, and the fidelity is just woo. It is on the old copies anyway. I'm not sure if there's been any remasters or reissues that have corrected that, but yeah, it's a pretty cool song. The guitar line is kind of got like a deceptively. There's one note in there that it just sounds a little sour and odd, but that's what gives it its coolness. And then of course the drumming, Collins is just locked into such a great groove. And it's a simple love song, but it's so much better and so much. There is a cheesy factor to it, but not to nearly the same extent as Your Own Special Way from the previous album, Wind and Wuthering. So, yeah, like I said, it's an awkward album. It doesn't really work. I don't think it's structured very well, and I don't think they got the track listing quite right. If anything, they sound complacent. It doesn't have the same charge as Trick of the Tail did when they were trying to compensate for losing Peter Gabriel. It's like they lost Hackett and just said, okay, let's just put some songs together and put it out, and yeah. And I think it suffers for that part, but it's still got, like I said, it's got those, it's got the classic Genesis sound, which is kind of starting to be a bad thing because, they'd already done it. They had to move on. And move on they did. So, yeah, next week. Not next week. Whenever the next video comes out, which could be at the same time as I publish this one, we'll get Duke by Genesis, which is a good album. So we'll talk about that then. Until then, see you later.